The history of gun control in America is, well, controversial and interesting. The history of gun control in America is a complex journey shaped by cultural, legal, and political forces. At its core, the debate surrounding gun control has primarily centered on two key principles: individual rights and public safety. In this video, I'm going to try to trace the key developments in U.S. gun control from the colonial era to, well, now. All right, let's start at the beginning. Back in the early days of this country, before the Constitution was ratified, colonial militias were essential for defense, especially in frontier settlements. Gun ownership was widespread, and individuals were often required to own firearms for service in local militias. Over in England, the English Bill of Rights of 1689 granted Protestants the right to bear arms, influencing early American views on gun ownership and the Second Amendment. In the wake of the Revolutionary War, the Second Amendment was ratified in 1791 as part of the Bill of Rights and states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The amendment was framed within the context of defending against tyranny and securing the new nation, but its exact interpretation was yet to be properly shaped by future opinions, court decisions, and the development and evolution of weapons. Despite the widespread ownership of firearms, many early American cities and states had local ordinances regulating such weapons. Laws like the Sullivan Act of 1911 in New York required permits for concealed carry and were among the first efforts at restricting firearms for public safety. By the early 20th century, the rise of organized crime during Prohibition led to increased public pressure for stronger gun control measures. As a result, the federal government began considering nationwide regulations. Following the surge in gang violence during the 1920s and 30s, particularly high-profile incidents like the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Congress passed the National Firearms Act in 1934. The NFA aimed to regulate specific categories of firearms, including machine guns and sawed-off shotguns. It imposed taxes and required registration for certain weapons, marking the first major federal gun control law. The Federal Firearms Act of 1938 further regulated gun commerce by requiring gun dealers to obtain licenses and keep detailed sales records. It also prohibited certain individuals, like convicted felons, from purchasing firearms. The 1960s were marked by a series of high-profile assassinations, including those of President John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Senator Robert F. Kennedy. In response, Congress passed the Gun Control Act of 1968. The act established a comprehensive regulatory framework for the sale and ownership of firearms. It prohibited interstate firearm transfers, set minimum ages for buyers, and expanded the list of prohibited purchasers to include drug addicts and individuals with mental illnesses. The Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986 was passed to address concerns from gun rights advocates that the Gun Control Act of 1968 had overreached. While it relaxed some regulations on gun dealers and interstate sales, it also banned civilian ownership of fully automatic firearms manufactured after 1986. Named after James Brady, who was shot and paralyzed during the assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan in 1981, the Brady Act required background checks for all firearm purchasers from federally licensed dealers. The act also introduced a waiting period for handgun purchases, giving law enforcement time to verify whether the buyer was eligible to own a firearm. Enacted under the Clinton administration, the assault weapons ban was part of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994. It prohibited the sale and manufacture of specific semi-automatic weapons, and large-capacity magazines. The ban expired in 2004 due to a sunset provision, and efforts to renew it have been politically contentious. A landmark Supreme Court case, District of Columbia versus Heller, ruled that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess firearms, unconnected to service in a militia. The decision struck down Washington, D.C.'s handgun ban and was a major victory for gun rights advocates. However, the ruling also allowed for the possibility of reasonable restrictions, acknowledging that the right to bear arms is not unlimited. A series of mass shootings, including those at Columbine, Sandy Hook, and Parkland, reignited the national debate on gun control. In response to the Sandy Hook shooting, President Obama pushed for expanded background checks and a renewal of the assault weapons ban. However, these measures failed to pass in Congress. After years of political stalemate, the bipartisan Safer Communities Act was signed into law in June 2022, representing the most significant gun control legislation in decades. This act expanded background checks for buyers under the age of 21, provided funding for mental health services, and closed the so-called boyfriend loophole, which prohibited individuals convicted of domestic violence from possessing firearms. The gun control debate remains deeply polarized among political lines. Gun rights advocates, led by organizations such as the NRA, argue that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual's right to own firearms and oppose new restrictions. Gun control advocates, on the other hand, emphasize the need for stronger regulations to reduce gun violence, focusing on issues like background checks, the regulations of assault weapons, and limiting high-capacity magazines. While federal laws have seen only incremental changes, many states have taken independent action on gun control. States like California and New York have enacted strict gun laws, while others such as Texas and Arizona have adapted more permissive laws, including constitutional carry, which allow individuals to carry firearms without a permit. The Supreme Court is poised to play a key role in shaping the future of gun control. Cases like New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin have challenged state-level restrictions, with the court striking down some laws as unconstitutional under the Second Amendment. This particular case, the Bruin case, along with Heller, are already influencing lower court decisions. The history of gun control in America reflects a balancing act between the right to bear arms and the need for public safety. While the nation's gun laws have evolved over time, the debate remains one of the most contentious issues in American politics. As society confronts new challenges, including mass shootings and political polarization, the future of gun control in America will likely continue to be shaped by both legal rulings and grassroots activism. For more videos on the Second Amendment, please subscribe.